Dr. Emma Patterson had examined hundreds of suicide cases, but when she noticed the same unusual bruise pattern on 3 different victims within a week, she knew something was terribly wrong. The bruises were in places that made impossible, and each case had been rushed through the system with suspicious speed. When Emma tried to investigate further, she discovered all 3 files had been mysteriously transferred to a different department, one that didn't officially exist. The security footage from those nights had been accidentally erased, and her supervisor warned her to drop it immediately. But Emma couldn't ignore what she'd seen. The final victim, a young teacher named Michael Rodriguez, had defensive wounds on his knuckles and traces of sedative in his bloodstream that weren't in the official report. Someone was covering up murders, and Emma was the only one who knew the truth. Her pale hands trembled as she photographed the evidence that would change everything. Emma spread the 3 case files across her desk in the sterile morgue office, the fluorescent lights humming overhead as she compared the photographs side by side. Each victim showed the same distinctive patterned circular bruises on both wrists, perfectly positioned where restraints would leave marks, yet all 3 cases had been classified as suicide by hanging. The first victim, Jennifer Walsh, a 34-year-old accountant, had allegedly hanged herself in her apartment, but the rope burns on her neck didn't match the bruising on her wrists. The second, David Chen, 29, supposedly used his belt in his garage, but Emma had noticed similar restraint marks that weren't mentioned in the official report. The third case, Maria Santos, 26, had been found in her bedroom, but the ligature marks told a different story than the one documented. Emma pulled up the processing timestamps on her computer screen. All 3 bodies had been examined and released within 6 hours of arrival, a record that should have taken at least 12 hours for proper examination. The rush job meant corners were cut, evidence overlooked, families denied proper closure. Working late again, Patterson. Dr. Harrison's voice made her jump. Her supervisor stood in the doorway, his usually neat gray hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. Just reviewing some inconsistencies, Emma said, quickly closing the first file. These 3 cases from this week, inconsistencies. Harrison stepped into the office, his tone sharper than usual. What kind of inconsistencies? Emma hesitated. In her 5 years working under Harrison, she'd never seen him this agitated. His hands fidgeted with his wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd only noticed during budget meetings with the hospital administration. The bruising patterns don't match the reported cause of death, she said carefully, and the processing times were unusually fast. I think we should request additional toxicology reports. Harrison's face went pale. He moved closer to her desk, his eyes scanning the open files. Patterson, these cases have already been closed. The families have been notified. We can't do our job properly. Emma stood up, surprised by her own boldness. Dr. Harrison, if these people were murdered, that's enough. His voice cut through the air like a scalpel. Harrison rarely raised his voice, preferring calm professionalism, even in stressful situations. Now his hands were visibly shaking. You're letting your imagination run wild. Suicide cases often have ... complications, defensive wounds from final struggles, unusual positioning due to panic. It's not uncommon, but Emma had been doing this work long enough to know the difference between struggle marks and restraint bruises. The patterns were too clean, too symmetrical, too deliberate. What about the processing times? She pressed. 6 hours is we were backed up that week. Emergency cases take priority. Harrison gathered the files from her desk, his movements jerky and anxious. I think you need some time off, Emma. You've been working too many double shifts. Emma watched him clutch the files against his chest like a shield. I'm not tired, Dr. Harrison. I'm concerned. These families deserve to know. The families know everything they need to know. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Sometimes, Patterson, the kindest thing we can do is let the dead rest in peace. The words hung in the air between them. Emma had never heard Harrison speak with such finality before, such fear. She studied his face, noting the way his jaw clenched, how his eyes avoided hers. I'll be taking these files, he said, backing toward the door. And Emma, I'd strongly suggest you focus on your current cases. Don't go looking for problems that don't exist. After he left, Emma sat in the empty office, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across her desk. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her camera roll, finding the photos she'd taken earlier of the bruise patterns. In her years of experience, she'd learned to document everything. Even when it seemed routine, the photos were still there, clear evidence of what she'd seen. Whatever was happening, Dr. Harrison was part of it, willingly or not. The man who had mentored her, who had taught her the importance of thoroughness and truth in their work, was now asking her to ignore evidence of possible murder. Emma locked her phone and grabbed her coat. She needed to get copies of those files before they disappeared completely. But as she reached for the filing cabinet, she found the drawer already empty. A small transfer slip in place of the 3 cases, Department 7B, priority transfer, authorized by D. Harrison. Emma had worked in this building for 5 years. She knew every department, every division, every office from the basement to the 7th floor. There was no Department 7B. Her hands were shaking now, just as they had when she first noticed the bruising patterns, but this time, it wasn't from excitement or curiosity. It was from the growing realization that she had stumbled onto something much more dangerous than medical malpractice. Emma arrived at work 30 minutes early the next morning, hoping to catch the night's security guard before his shift ended. The hospital corridors were eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of ventilation systems and the occasional beep from patient monitors echoing through the halls. She found Tom Walsh finishing his rounds near the morgue entrance, his weathered face showing the fatigue of a 12-hour shift. Tom had been working hospital security for over 15 years, and Emma had always found him to be straightforward and honest, qualities that seemed increasingly rare in her workplace. "Morning, Dr. Patterson," Tom said, tipping his security cap. "You're here early today." "Tom, I need to ask you something," Emma said, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "Last night, some case files were transferred from our department. Do you know anything about that?" Tom's expression shifted, his friendly demeanor becoming guarded. He pulled out his logbook and flipped through several pages. "Yeah, I remember that around 2 a.m., 2 men came down with authorization forms, said they needed files for Department 7B. Department 7B. Emma's heart sank. "Tom, that department doesn't exist. I've checked the building directory, the hospital database." "Look, Doc," Tom interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't ask questions when people show up with proper paperwork." The forms had Dr. Harrison's signature, official hospital letterhead. Everything looked legitimate. Emma studied Tom's face. In all their interactions over the years, she'd never seen him this uncomfortable. His eyes kept darting toward the security cameras mounted in the corners of the hallway. "Can you describe these men?" she asked. Tom hesitated, then shook his head. "I probably shouldn't. I mean, they were just doing their job, right? Tall guys, dark suits, very professional. One of them had a briefcase, the other carried a large envelope. Did they show you ID? Hospital badges?" Everything looked official. Tom's voice was strained now, as if he was trying to convince himself, as much as her. "Dr. Patterson, I've got a family to think about. 20 years until retirement. I can't afford to ask the wrong questions." The weight of his words hit Emma immediately. Tom wasn't just being cautious, he was scared. In 15 years of working hospital security, he'd probably seen plenty of unusual activity, but something about last night had shaken him. "The security footage," Emma said. "Can you show me the recordings from last night?" Tom's face went white. "That's the thing, Doc. The cameras malfunctioned around 1:45 a.m. System glitch," they said. "Lost about 3 hours of footage from this entire wing." "A system glitch? Tom, those cameras are brand new. They were installed just 6 months ago." "I know." He closed his logbook and tucked it into his pocket. "Look, Dr. Patterson, I've seen a lot of things working nights in this place. Usually, I can find a reasonable explanation for everything. But last night," he trailed off, shaking his head. Emma waited, sensing he had more to say. "Those men, they knew exactly where to go," Tom continued. "Didn't ask for directions, didn't need to check room numbers. They walked straight to your department like they'd been here before. And when they left, they took the stairs instead of the elevator. Professional habit, maybe, but it struck me as odd." "What do you mean?" "People who belong in a hospital use elevators. People who want to avoid security cameras take the stairs." Tom adjusted his belt, a nervous gesture Emma had never seen from him before. "Dr. Patterson, I don't know what those files contained, but somebody wanted them badly enough to come in the middle of the night with fake department authorizations." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Fake authorizations. Had to be. I called the main office this morning to confirm the transfer. They have no record of any Department 7B, and no authorization was filed for removing evidence from the medical examiner's office. Tom looked around again, then leaned closer. Doc, if I were you, I'd be very careful asking questions about this. Tom, you have to report this. If those files were stolen, with what proof? Tom's laugh was bitter. Missing security footage, fake department numbers, unauthorized transfers. You think hospital administration wants to deal with that kind of publicity? They'll blame it on paperwork errors and system glitches, and I'll be the one who loses his job for not following proper procedures. Emma understood his position, but the implications were staggering. Someone had orchestrated the theft of evidence from a medical examiner's office, using forged documents and taking advantage of a convenient security camera malfunction. The level of planning and resources required suggested this wasn't a simple cover-up. One more thing, Tom said as his replacement arrived for the day shift. Dr. Harrison came in about an hour after those men left. Never seen him here that late before. He spent about 20 minutes in his office, then left through the same stairwell. After Tom left, Emma stood alone in the corridor, staring at the empty filing cabinet in the morgue office. The transfer slip was gone too, leaving no trace that the 3 case files had ever existed, but she still had her photographs, and more importantly, she had her memory of what she'd seen. That someone had murdered 3 people and made it look like suicide. Someone with enough influence to corrupt autopsy reports, steal evidence from a medical examiner's office, and convince her own supervisor to participate in the cover-up. And now they knew that she knew. Emma pulled out her phone and scrolled to her contact list. She needed help. Someone outside the hospital system who might be able to investigate without tipping off whoever was orchestrating this cover-up. Her finger hovered over Detective Lisa Crawford's number. They'd worked together on several cases over the years, and Lisa had always struck her as someone who wouldn't ignore evidence just because it was inconvenient. But first, she needed to make sure her own evidence was secure. Emma opened her camera app and began photographing everything: the empty filing cabinet, the missing transfer slip holder, even the security camera positions Tom had mentioned. If someone was trying to erase all traces of what she'd discovered, she was going to make sure that became impossible. Emma spent the rest of the day trying to maintain normal routines while her mind raced with questions. She processed 2 new cases that came in, documented everything meticulously, and avoided any interaction with Dr. Harrison beyond professional necessities. Every time she heard footsteps in the corridor, her heart rate spiked. By 6 o'clock, most of the day shift had gone home, leaving the medical examiner's office nearly empty. Emma gathered her belongings and headed for the parking garage, her phone heavy in her pocket with the contact information for Detective Crawford. She'd decided to make the call from home, away from the hospital's potential surveillance. The parking garage was dimly lit, with several fluorescent bulbs flickering, or burned out completely. Emma's footsteps echoed off the concrete walls as she walked toward her car, parked in her usual spot on the 3rd level. The sound of her heels clicking against the pavement seemed unnaturally loud in the empty space. Dr. Patterson. Emma spun around, her heart jumping into her throat. Dr. Harrison emerged from behind a concrete pillar, his appearance disheveled and his usually calm demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. His hospital coat was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and there were dark stains on his shirt that could have been coffee or something worse. Dr. Harrison, what are you doing down here? Emma tried to keep her voice steady, but she was already calculating the distance to her car and wondering if she could reach it before he could stop her. We need to talk, he said, moving closer but keeping his hands visible. Emma, I know you've been asking questions about those files. I need you to understand how serious this situation is. What situation? Emma backed toward her car, her keys ready in her hand. 3 people died under suspicious circumstances, evidence has been destroyed, and security footage has conveniently disappeared. I'd say that's pretty serious. Harrison ran his hands through his gray hair, making it stand up at odd angles. You don't understand. This isn't just about those 3 cases. There are people involved in this who don't like questions. Emma, people with resources and influence that go far beyond this hospital. What people? Who are you talking about? I can't tell you that. Harrison's voice cracked slightly. But I can tell you that your investigation ends here. Tonight, you delete those photos. You stop asking questions, and you focus on your regular cases. That's the only way to keep you safe. Emma stared at her mentor, the man who had taught her the importance of thoroughness and integrity in their work. Safe from what? Dr. Harrison, what have you gotten involved in? I didn't have a choice. The words burst out of him like a confession he'd been holding back for too long. You think I wanted this? You think I chose to compromise everything I've worked for? Then why did you? Harrison looked around the packing garage, his eyes darting to every shadow and corner. Because they made it clear that cooperation was the only option. Because they showed me what happens to people who don't cooperate. Because I have a wife and grandchildren, Emma, and I couldn't risk. He stopped, shaking his head violently. No, I can't tell you this. The less you know, the safer you'll be. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the concrete walls around them. Dr. Harrison, who killed those 3 people? I don't know, and I don't want to know. His voice was barely above a whisper now. All I know is that certain cases require special handling, fast processing, minimal documentation, no questions asked. I was told it was a matter of national security, some kind of ongoing investigation that required discretion. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it. Harrison leaned against a concrete pillar, suddenly looking much older than his 58 years. It was easier than considering the alternatives, easier than admitting that I'd become an accessory to murder. The word hung between them in the dim light of the parking garage. Murder. He'd said it out loud, confirming what Emma had suspected but hoped wasn't true. How long has this been going on? She asked. 2 years, maybe longer. The first case seemed legitimate, a federal witness who'd committed suicide before he could testify. I was told to expedite the processing for security reasons. Then there was another case, and another. By the time I realized what was really happening, I was already in too deep. Emma felt sick. How many people, Dr. Harrison? How many murder victims have been processed as suicides? I don't count them. His voice was hollow. I can't count them. But Emma, you need to understand these people, whoever they are. They have connections everywhere. Police, prosecutors, hospital administrators, city officials. They know about your investigation already. They know you took photographs. How could they possibly? Because I had to tell them. Harrison's confession hit her like a physical blow. They called me this afternoon. They knew you'd been asking questions, knew about the security footage, knew you'd spoken to Tom Walsh. They have sources everywhere, Emma, including people you trust. Emma's mind raced. If Harrison was telling the truth, then her investigation was already compromised. Worse, she might have put herself in real danger by documenting evidence and asking questions. What do they want? She asked. Your silence. Permanent silence. They're offering you a transfer to another hospital, a significant pay increase, and a promise that you'll never see another suspicious case. All you have to do is forget what you've seen and never speak about it again. And if I refuse? Harrison's face went pale. Emma, please don't make me answer that question. The implication was clear enough. Emma looked around the parking garage, suddenly aware of how isolated and vulnerable she was. The flickering fluorescent lights created shifting shadows that could hide anything. The concrete walls would muffle sound. If something happened to her here, it might be hours before anyone found her. I need time to think, she said, moving toward her car. You have until tomorrow morning, Harrison replied. They want an answer by 8 a.m. Emma, please, I know this goes against everything we've been taught, everything we believe in. But sometimes the system is too corrupt to fight. Sometimes the only victory is survival. Emma reached her car and fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking. Dr. Harrison, those 3 people who died, Jennifer Walsh, David Chen, Maria Santos, they had families, people who loved them. Don't they deserve the truth? The truth won't bring them back, but it might get you killed. Harrison stepped back into the shadows between the concrete pillars. Think about your future, Emma. Think about whether justice for the dead is worth dying for. As Emma drove out of the parking garage, her rearview mirror showed Harrison standing, alone under the flickering lights, a broken man who had traded his integrity for his safety. She understood his choice, even sympathized with it. But she couldn't make the same decision. Somewhere in the city were the families of 3 murder victims, living with the pain of believing their loved ones had committed suicide. They deserved better than convenient lies and corrupted officials. They deserved the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be to uncover. Emma pulled into traffic, her phone still heavy in her pocket with Detective Crawford's number. The decision was made. She would make the call tonight, and tomorrow, she would find out just how far this conspiracy reached. Emma barely slept that night, alternating between reviewing her photographs and staring at Detective Crawford's contact information on her phone. By morning, she'd made her decision. She would document everything she could before making contact with anyone outside the hospital. If Harrison was right about the reach of this conspiracy, she needed ironclad evidence before she could trust anyone. She arrived at work to find a new body bag waiting in the examination room. The paperwork indicated another apparent suicide. Michael Rodriguez, 28, a high school teacher, found hanging in his apartment by his landlord. The initial police report suggested depression following a recent breakup, with a note found at the scene. Emma's heart sank as she read the details. Another young person, another convenient suicide, another family destroyed by what appeared to be a pattern of murders disguised as self-inflicted deaths. She pulled on her gloves and masks, preparing for what she knew would be another exercise in documenting evidence that would likely disappear. As she unzipped the body bag, Emma immediately noticed something that made her stomach clench. Michael Rodriguez had defensive wounds on his knuckle-scraped skin and bruised bones that indicated he'd fought his attacker. The wounds were fresh, inflicted within hours of his death, and completely inconsistent with someone who had supposedly hanged himself voluntarily. She photographed the injuries from multiple angles, using the magnifying lamp to capture every detail. The pattern of bruising suggested Rodriguez had struck a hard surface repeatedly, probably trying to defend himself or escape from restraints. There were also small puncture marks on his left arm, barely visible but clearly recent. Emma collected tissue samples from around the puncture marks and labeled them for toxicology testing. If Rodriguez had been sedated before his death, there would be chemical evidence in his system. She made a mental note to request the full toxicology panel, knowing that the standard suicide workup might not test for the right substances. Moving to Rodriguez's neck, Emma found ligature marks consistent with hanging, but the pattern bothered her. The rope burns were too uniform, too clean, without the irregular pressure points that typically result from a struggling victim. It looked more like someone had been hanged while unconscious or heavily sedated. Find anything interesting, Dr. Patterson? Emma jumped, nearly dropping her camera. Dr. Harrison stood in the doorway, his face drawn and tired. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Just performing a standard examination, Emma replied carefully, stepping between Harrison and the body. Of course, standard procedure. Harrison moved closer, his eyes scanning the examination table. Though I notice you're being particularly thorough with the photography. Any specific reason? Emma met his gaze, searching for any sign of the man who had once been her respected mentor. I always document everything thoroughly. You taught me that. Yes, I did. Harrison's voice was sad, almost regretful. Emma, I hope you've had time to consider our conversation last night. The offer is still on the table. I'm still thinking about it, Emma lied, continuing her examination while Harrison watched. She moved to Rodriguez's hands, noting the defensive wounds more carefully. Under her magnifying glass, she could see skin fragments under his fingernails that he'd scratched his attacker during the struggle. This was crucial DNA evidence that could identify his killer. Assuming the samples weren't compromised or lost like the previous cases, Dr. Patterson Harrison said quietly, I need to remind you that this case requires expedited processing. The family is requesting immediate release of the body for funeral arrangements. Emma looked up sharply. Expedited processing. Dr. Harrison, this body just arrived 2 hours ago. Standard protocol requires. Sometimes we have to make exceptions for grieving families. Harrison's tone was firm, but his eyes were pleading. The police investigation is complete. The cause of death is clear, and prolonged examination would only add to the family's suffering. The cause of death is not clear, Emma said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. This man has defensive wounds, possible puncture marks from injection, and ligature patterns that don't match voluntary hanging. We need full toxicology, DNA analysis, and Dr. Patterson. Harrison's voice cut through her protests. The case is classified as suicide. That determination has already been made by the investigating officers and confirmed by the preliminary examination. Our job is to process the paperwork and release the body. Emma stared at him, finally understanding the full scope of what she was up against. The corruption wasn't limited to the medical examiner's office. It extended to the police department, possibly to the district attorney's office. maybe even to the mayor's office. Rodriguez's death had been classified as suicide before his body had even reached the morgue. "What about the family?" Emma asked. "Don't they deserve to know the truth about what happened to him?" "The truth is that a troubled young man took his own life," Harrison replied. "That's what the police determined. That's what the evidence shows, and that's what we're going to report." "That's not what the evidence shows, and you know it." Harrison moved closer to the examination table, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Emma, there are people waiting for my call. People who want to know whether you're going to be reasonable about this case, just like the others. I can tell them that you understand the situation, that you're willing to be a team player, or I can tell them that you're going to be a problem." The threat was clear, even if it was delivered in the gentle tone Harrison typically used for difficult conversations with grieving families. Emma looked down at Michael Rodriguez's body, at the evidence of violence that would be buried along with him if she agreed to Harrison's request. "I need to finish the examination," she said finally. Harrison nodded slowly. "Of course. But remember, Emma, sometimes the kindest thing we can do for the living is let the dead rest in peace. Don't let thoroughness become cruelty." After he left, Emma worked quickly to document everything she could. She took dozens of photographs, collected tissue samples, and made detailed notes about every injury and inconsistency she observed. If this evidence was going to disappear like the others, at least she would have a complete record of what she'd found. The puncture marks on Rodriguez's arm were particularly interesting. Under magnification, she could see that they were made by a large-gauge needle, probably used to administer a fast-acting sedative. The placement suggested someone with medical training. The injection site was precisely positioned to hit a major vein for maximum absorption. Emma swabbed the puncture marks and sealed the samples in evidence bags. Even if the official toxicology report came back clean, she would have physical evidence that Rodriguez had been injected with something shortly before his death. As she worked, Emma thought about Harrison's words. Rodriguez was 28 years old, a teacher who had dedicated his life to helping children learn and grow. His family was probably struggling to understand how someone who seemed to have everything to live for could take his own life. They would spend years blaming themselves, wondering if they could have done something differently. That was the real cruelty, not the thorough examination that would reveal the truth, but the lie that would haunt Rodriguez's family forever. Emma finished her documentation and carefully stored all evidence in her personal locker rather than the official evidence room. She had a feeling that anything left in official storage would disappear as quickly as the other cases. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Some questions are better left unasked. Some truths are too dangerous to pursue. Think carefully about your next steps." Emma deleted the message and pocketed her phone. Someone was watching her, tracking her investigation, trying to intimidate her into silence. But they had made one mistake by threatening her. They had confirmed that she was on the right track. Michael Rodriguez deserved justice. His family deserved the truth. And Emma was going to make sure they got both, no matter what the cost. Emma sat in the corner booth of Murphy's coffee shop, 3 blocks from the hospital, nervously checking her phone every few minutes. She'd chosen this location because it was public enough to feel safe but quiet enough for a sensitive conversation. The afternoon crowd was light: a few students with laptops, an elderly couple sharing a newspaper, and a businessman on his phone. Detective Lisa Crawford arrived exactly on time, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her sharp eyes immediately scanning the room before settling on Emma. They'd worked together on several cases over the past 2 years, and Emma had always respected Lisa's thorough approach to investigations. "Dr. Patterson," Lisa said, sliding into the booth across from her, "your message said you had information about suspicious deaths. I have to admit, that got my attention." Emma had spent the morning deciding how much to reveal in their initial conversation. If Harrison was right about the conspiracy's reach, even the police department might be compromised. But she needed an ally, and Lisa had always struck her as someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. 3 apparent suicides came through our office this week, Emma began carefully. Jennifer Walsh, David Chen, and Maria Santos. All young adults, all classified as death by hanging, all processed unusually quickly through the system. Lisa pulled out a small notebook and pen. "I remember those cases. Walsh was handled by Detective Morrison, Chen by Detective Burke, and Santos was mine. What makes you think they weren't suicides?" Emma showed Lisa the photographs on her phone. explaining the bruise patterns and inconsistencies she'd observed. As she spoke, she watched Lisa's expression carefully, looking for any sign of recognition or concern. "These bruising patterns," Lisa said, studying the images. "They do look like restraint marks. But suicide victims sometimes have unusual injuries from their final struggles. That's what my supervisor said. But there's more." Emma lowered her voice. "All 3 case files were stolen from our office 2 nights ago by men claiming to represent a non-existent department. The security footage from that night conveniently malfunctioned." Lisa looked up sharply. "Stolen? Did you file a report? With who?" "My supervisor is involved in the cover-up, and according to him, these people have connections throughout the police department." Emma hesitated, then decided to trust her instincts about Lisa. "Detective Crawford, I think these 3 people were murdered, and someone with significant resources is covering it up." Lisa closed her notebook and leaned back in her seat. "Dr. Patterson, that's a serious accusation. You're talking about conspiracy, corruption, murder. I know how it sounds, but I've been doing this work for 5 years, and I've never seen anything like this pattern of inconsistencies and cover." "Actually," Lisa said slowly, "you might be onto something. I've been reviewing the Santos case because something about it bothered me. Maria Santos was a paralegal at a downtown law firm. No history of depression, no financial problems, no relationship issues. Her coworkers said she'd been excited about a new case she was working on." Emma felt a surge of hope. "What kind of case?" "That's where it gets interesting. Santos was researching a civil lawsuit against a pharmaceutical company called Meridian Labs. The law firm was representing several plaintiffs who claimed they'd been used as test subjects without their knowledge or consent." "Test subjects for what?" Lisa pulled out her phone and scrolled through her notes. "Experimental drugs, primarily sedatives and mood-altering substances. The plaintiffs claimed they were given these drugs while they were patients at various hospitals and clinics, then monitored for side effects without being told they were part of a study." Emma's mind raced. "The puncture marks I found on Rodriguez's arm, someone with medical training injected him with something. And the bruising patterns could be from restraints used during forced drug administration." "Rodriguez?" Lisa looked confused. "I don't have a Rodriguez case. He came in this morning. Another apparent suicide. Another rushed processing order. Another set of injuries that don't match the official cause of death." Emma showed Lisa the photos from Rodriguez's examination. "I think he was sedated, then hanged while unconscious." Lisa studied the images carefully. "These defensive wounds are significant. And you're right about the puncture marks. That's definitely from a large gauge needle. Dr. Patterson, if you're right about this, we're looking at a systematic murder campaign to cover up illegal drug testing, maybe, or to eliminate witnesses who could expose the testing." Lisa leaned forward. Santos had been collecting testimony from potential victims. Her computer at work was wiped clean the day after her body was found, and all her case files disappeared from the law firm's servers. Emma felt the pieces clicking into place. Someone is killing people who could expose Meridian Labs' illegal experiments, then making the deaths look like suicides to avoid investigation. That would explain the medical knowledge required for the injections and the resources needed for the cover-up. Pharmaceutical companies have connections everywhere: hospitals, police departments, city officials, medical examiners' offices. "My supervisor admitted he's been falsifying autopsy reports for 2 years, Emma said. "He claims he was told it was for national security reasons, but I think he was just being used." Lisa nodded grimly. Pharmaceutical companies often work with government agencies on classified projects. It would be easy to convince someone that they're protecting national security when they're actually covering up corporate crimes. "So what do we do?" "We need more evidence. The photos you've taken are a good start, but we need to establish a clear connection between the victims and Meridian Labs. We also need to find out who else might be involved in the cover-up." Emma felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that someone finally believed her. Fear about what they might uncover as they dug deeper into the conspiracy. "Detective Crawford, there's something else. This morning I received a threatening text message from an unknown number. Someone knows I'm investigating this." Lisa's expression hardened. "Dr. Patterson, if these people are willing to commit murder to protect their secrets, they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens to expose them. From now on, you need to be extremely careful. Don't go anywhere alone." Don't follow predictable routines, and don't trust anyone at the hospital, not even you, Lisa smiled grimly. Especially not me, until we know for sure who can be trusted. But I'll tell you this, I've been a detective for 8 years, and I've never seen a case that needed solving more than this one. As they prepared to leave, Lisa handed Emma a burner phone. Use this to contact me from now on. And Dr. Patterson, document everything, but keep copies somewhere safe. If we're going to bring down this conspiracy, we'll need evidence that can't be stolen or destroyed. Emma pocketed the phone, feeling both hopeful and terrified. She finally had an ally, but she also understood that her investigation had just become much more dangerous. Emma spent the evening in the public library, using their computers to research Meridian Labs while avoiding her home and workplace. The library's internet connection couldn't be traced back to her personally, and the busy environment provided security through anonymity. What she found made her stomach turn. Meridian Labs had been founded 15 years ago by Dr. Marcus Webb, a former military researcher with expertise in chemical warfare and battlefield medicine. The company's public face focused on developing treatments for PTSD and depression. But Emma discovered a pattern of lawsuits and regulatory violations stretching back over a decade. The first red flag was a 2018 case where Meridian had been fined for conducting drug trials without proper patient consent. The company had paid the fine and agreed to enhanced oversight. But similar violations had occurred in 2020 and 2022. Each time, Meridian's lawyers had negotiated settlements that kept the details out of public records. Emma cross-referenced the dates with her mental timeline of suspicious cases at the hospital. The pattern was chilling. The number of suicides processed through their office had increased significantly after each regulatory violation, as if someone was systematically eliminating witnesses who could testify against the company. Her burner phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Found Santos's backup files on personal cloud storage. Meet me tomorrow, 9 a.m., Riverside Park, near the fountain. Emma typed back, "What did you find?" "Evidence that connects all 4 victims to Meridian. This is bigger than we thought." At home that night, Emma triple-checked her locks and closed all the curtains before laying out everything she'd discovered. She'd photographed Rodriguez's evidence samples before leaving work and hidden the originals in a safety deposit box at a bank across town. If something happened to her, at least the evidence would survive. The next morning, Emma arrived at Riverside Park early, choosing a bench with clear sight lines in all directions. The park was busy with joggers and dog walkers, providing natural camouflage for their meeting. Lisa appeared at exactly 9 o'clock, carrying a coffee and a manila folder. Santos was thorough, Lisa said without preamble, sitting down beside Emma. She'd been building a case against Meridian for 6 months, collecting testimony from dozens of potential victims. Lisa opened the folder to reveal printed emails, medical records, and witness statements. According to these documents, Meridian was using patients at 6 different hospitals as unwitting test subjects. The hospitals were told they were participating in a government-sponsored study on trauma recovery, but patients were never informed they were receiving experimental drugs. Emma scanned the documents, her medical training helping her understand the implications. These dosages are massive. Some of these experimental compounds could cause permanent neurological damage or death. That's not the worst part, Lisa said grimly. Santos found evidence that Meridian was specifically targeting vulnerable populations, homeless individuals, addiction recovery patients, people with mental health issues, people whose deaths might not generate much investigation, people like our 4 victims. Exactly. Jennifer Walsh had been in rehab 3 months before her death. David Chen was being treated for anxiety disorder. Maria Santos herself had been receiving counseling for workplace stress, and according to his medical records, Michael Rodriguez had been prescribed antidepressants following his breakup. Emma felt sick. They were all patients in the mental health system, all receiving treatment that could have included experimental drugs without their knowledge. Lisa nodded. Santos had identified a pattern: patients would receive treatment at specific hospitals, show improvement for several weeks, then suddenly develop new symptoms that required different medications. The new medications were the experimental drugs, and if the patients started asking questions or showing adverse reactions, they died in apparent suicides before they could expose the program. Lisa pulled out more documents. Santos found financial records showing payments from Meridian to several hospitals, including yours. The money was labeled as research grants, but the amounts were too large for legitimate studies. Emma studied the financial records, recognizing several names from her hospital's administration. This explains how they could afford to buy off so many people. If they were getting millions in research grants, they could afford to pay for silence. There's more. Santos discovered that some of the patients who died weren't even supposed to be part of the study. They were eliminated because they'd accidentally witnessed drug administration or overheard conversations about the program. Murder witnesses who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Exactly. Rodriguez, for example, wasn't a patient at any of the participating hospitals, but he was dating a nurse who worked at St. Mary's, one of the hospitals, receiving Meridian grants. Santos found evidence that Rodriguez had been asking questions about unusual drug protocols he'd heard about from his girlfriend. Emma remembered the defensive wounds on Rodriguez's hands, the evidence that he'd fought desperately against his attackers. He found out about the program and threatened to expose it. According to Santos's notes, Rodriguez had been planning to contact the state medical board about potential patient safety violations. His girlfriend had confided in him about orders to administer unmarked medications to certain patients, so they killed him and made it look like suicide related to his breakup. Lisa closed the folder and looked around the park nervously. Emma Santos documented over 40 suspicious deaths connected to this program, patients who asked too many questions, family members who demanded answers, hospital staff who expressed concerns. All of them died in apparent suicides or accidents. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Emma had thought they were dealing with 3 or 4 murders, but the reality was far worse. Meridian Labs had been systematically eliminating anyone who could expose their illegal human experimentation, using corrupted medical and law enforcement systems to cover up their crimes. "We have to stop them," Emma said. "We will. But first, we need to understand exactly who's involved and how deep this goes." Santos's investigation was cut short, but she left us a roadmap for exposing the entire network. Lisa handed Emma a USB drive. "Everything's on here: financial records, witness statements, medical files, correspondence between Meridian and the hospitals." Santos even found evidence of a federal agency that was supposed to be overseeing the program, but was actually helping to cover it up. Emma pocketed the drive carefully. "What's our next step?" "We need to find Dr. Sarah Kim, a former Meridian researcher who Santos was supposed to interview the week she died." According to these notes, Kim had evidence that could bring down the entire program, but she disappeared after Santos's death. Disappeared or eliminated. Unknown, but if she's still alive, she might be our best chance of exposing this conspiracy. Santos's notes indicate that Kim was the lead researcher on the experimental drug program before she quit in disgust. She would know everything: the scope of the testing, who authorized it, where the bodies are buried. Emma felt a mixture of hope and dread. If Dr. Kim was alive and willing to talk, they might finally have enough evidence to expose Meridian Labs and bring justice for the victims. But if Kim had been eliminated like the others, they might be walking into a trap. "Detective Crawford, how do we know we can trust this information? What if Santos's files were compromised before she died?" Lisa had clearly considered this possibility. Santos was paranoid about security. She used multiple backup systems and encryption protocols. "The files I found were stored on a server in another country, accessible only through passwords she'd hidden in her personal effects. If Meridian had found these files, they would have destroyed them immediately." As they prepared to leave, Emma noticed a man in a dark suit standing near the park entrance, apparently reading a newspaper but clearly watching their bench. "Lisa, we're being observed." Lisa glanced casually in the man's direction. "I see him. We need to leave separately. You go first. Take the path toward the parking area. I'll wait 5 minutes, then leave through the main entrance." Emma stood up slowly, fighting the urge to run. As she walked away, she could feel eyes watching her every move. The investigation had taken on a new urgency. Meridian Labs knew they were getting close to the truth, and they wouldn't hesitate to add 2 more names to their list of suspicious deaths. Emma took a circuitous route home from the park, stopping at 3 different stores and doubling back twice to check if she was being followed. The black sedan first appeared in her rearview mirror outside the grocery store. maintaining a careful distance as she drove through the city. When she turned into her apartment complex, the sedan continued straight, but Emma noticed it parked across the street. When she looked out her bedroom window 30 minutes later, she tried to maintain her normal evening routine, cooking dinner, watching television, preparing for the next day, but every sound from the hallway made her heart race. The building's normal creaks and settling noises suddenly seemed threatening, and she found herself checking the locks on her door multiple times. Around 10 o'clock, Emma decided to take a shower, hoping the hot water might help her relax. She was rinsing shampoo from her hair when she heard her apartment door open and close. She froze under the spray, straining to listen over the sound of running water. Footsteps moved carefully through her living room, pausing at various locations, as if someone was systematically searching her apartment. Emma turned off the water and grabbed a towel, her mind racing through options. Her phone was on the nightstand in the bedroom. The bathroom window was too small to climb through. The only exit was past whoever was in her apartment. She wrapped the towel around herself and pressed her ear to the bathroom door. The footsteps had moved to her bedroom, and she could hear drawers being opened and closed. Professional searchers, looking for something specific but trying not to leave obvious signs of their presence. Emma waited until the sounds moved back toward the living room, then quietly opened the bathroom door. She could see a tall figure in dark clothing examining her bookshelf, moving books aside to check behind them. A second person was going through her kitchen cabinets with methodical precision. They weren't burglars. Burglars would have taken her television, laptop, and jewelry box, all of which were still in plain sight. These were professionals looking for evidence, probably the photographs and documents she'd collected about the Meridian conspiracy. Fortunately, Emma had anticipated this possibility. All of her evidence was stored in the safety deposit box, and the USB drive Lisa had given her was hidden inside a hollowed-out book she'd placed randomly among dozens of others on her shelf. Unless they knew exactly what to look for, they wouldn't find it. One of the searchers moved toward the bathroom, and Emma quickly stepped into the shower stall, pulling the curtain closed. She held her breath as footsteps entered the bathroom, then heard the medicine cabinet being opened and the contents of her laundry hamper being examined. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the footsteps moved back toward the front of the apartment. Emma heard her door open and close again, followed by silence. She waited another 10 minutes before emerging from the bathroom, her entire body shaking with adrenaline. The search had been professional and thorough, but subtle. Someone unfamiliar with her apartment might not notice anything amiss, but Emma could see the signs everywhere. Books slightly out of order, kitchen items moved a few inches from their original positions, her computer mouse oriented differently than she'd left it. They'd been looking for physical evidence, documents, photographs, computer files, but they'd also installed surveillance equipment. Emma found a small listening device attached to the underside of her coffee table, and another hidden behind her bedroom mirror. Her laptop had been accessed, though she kept nothing incriminating on it. Emma dressed quickly and grabbed the purse, keys, and the hollowed-out book containing Lisa's USB drive. She couldn't stay in the apartment knowing it was compromised, and she needed to warn Lisa that their investigation had definitely attracted dangerous attention. As she prepared to leave, Emma noticed something that made her blood run cold. On her kitchen counter, someone had left a single white rose with a small card attached. The message was simple: some flowers bloom beautifully before they're cut down. Choose your season wisely. The threat was clear but deniable of question. Whoever had left it could claim it was a romantic gesture or a case of mistaken identity. But Emma understood the real message: stop investigating or join the list of suspicious deaths. She photographed the rose and note with her burner phone, then left through her apartment's back entrance, avoiding the main lobby where security cameras might record her departure. The black sedan was still parked across the street, confirming that she was under active surveillance. Emma walked 6 blocks to a 24-hour diner, choosing a booth in the back where she could watch the entrance. While making calls on her burner phone, she tried Lisa's number 3 times, but got no answer. Either Lisa was in a situation where she couldn't respond, or something had happened to her. At 2 a.m., Emma finally reached Lisa, who answered in a whisper. "Emma, thank God. I can't talk long. My apartment's been searched too, and I think my phone's been tapped. They left a threat at my place. A rose with a note about flowers being cut down. Subtle but effective. Emma, we need to find Dr. Kim immediately. I tracked down her last known address, but it's going to be dangerous to approach her. These people know we're investigating." Where is she? Safe house, outside the city. But Emma, we have to assume they're monitoring our communications and tracking our movements. From now on, we communicate only through burner phones and meet only in public places. Emma looked around the diner, noting the late-night customers and wondering if any of them were watching her. Detective Crawford, what if Dr. Kim is already dead? What if we're walking into a trap? Then we'll find out together. But Emma can't stop now. Santos died for this information, and so did Rodriguez and the others. If we don't expose this conspiracy, more people are going to die. When do we contact Dr. Kim? Tomorrow morning. There's a farmer's market in Millfield, about an hour outside the city. Meet me there at 10 o'clock, near the apple vendor. Come alone, and make sure you're not followed. After ending the call, Emma sat in the diner until dawn, nursing coffee and planning her next moves. She couldn't return to her apartment, which was certainly under surveillance. She couldn't go to work, where Dr. Harrison and others might be watching for signs that she was continuing her investigation. Instead, she checked into a small motel on the outskirts of town, paying cash and using a false name. The room was basic, but clean, and more importantly, it gave her a place to review Lisa's USB drive without risking detection. The files were even more damning than Lisa had indicated. Santos had documented a network of corruption that included hospital administrators, police officials, city council members, and federal regulators. Meridian Labs had essentially purchased a complete cover-up system, ensuring that any deaths related to their illegal experiments would be quickly classified as suicides or accidents. One document particularly caught Emma's attention: a list of priority targets for elimination. The list included Santos's name, along with several other researchers, journalists, and potential witnesses. At the bottom of the list, added in red ink, were two new names: Dr. Emma Patterson and Detective Lisa Crawford. Emma stared at her own name on what was essentially a hit list, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. They'd crossed a line from which there was no return. Either they would expose this conspiracy and bring the perpetrators to justice, or they would become the next suspicious deaths processed through a corrupted system. She set her alarm for 8 o'clock and tried to get some sleep, knowing that tomorrow would determine whether their investigation succeeded, or whether they joined the growing list of Meridian's victims. Emma arrived at the Millfield Farmers Market early, using the time to scout the location and identify potential threats. The market was busy with weekend shoppers, providing good cover for a clandestine meeting, but also making it difficult to spot surveillance. She positioned herself near the apple vendor as instructed, pretending to examine the produce while watching for Lisa. Detective Crawford appeared at exactly 10 o'clock, approaching from the opposite side of the market. She looked tired and stressed, her usual professional composure showing cracks. They made eye contact briefly, then Lisa moved to a produce stand several vendors away, following the security protocol they'd established. 10 minutes later, a woman approached Emma's position, mid-40s, Asian, wearing jeans and a baseball cap that partially concealed her face. She moved with the careful awareness of someone who'd been living in fear for months. "Dr. Patterson?" the woman asked quietly. "Detective Crawford said you had questions about Meridian Labs." "Dr. Kim?" The woman nodded. "Sarah Kim. I was the lead researcher on Project Mindbridge, until I discovered what we were really doing to those patients." Her voice carried the weight of months of guilt and terror. Emma glanced around to make sure they weren't being observed. "Can we talk somewhere more private?" Dr. Kim led them to a small cafe on the edge of the market, choosing a corner table where they could speak without being overheard. Lisa joined them a few minutes later, after confirming that neither woman had been followed. "Dr. Kim," Emma began, "we have evidence that Meridian has been murdering people to cover up illegal drug experiments. We need to understand the scope of what they were doing." Sarah Kim's hands shook as she reached for her coffee cup. Project Mindbridge was supposed to develop rapid-acting antidepressants for military personnel suffering from PTSD. The Pentagon was funding the research through a classified contract, which gave us cover to conduct human trials without normal oversight. "But the trials weren't legitimate?" Lisa asked. "They started that way. We recruited volunteers from veteran support groups, people who understood they were participating in experimental treatment. But the initial results were ... problematic. The drugs worked too well. They didn't just treat depression, they completely altered personality and memory." Emma felt a chill. "What do you mean, altered memory?" "Subjects couldn't remember traumatic experiences. But they also lost other memories, family relationships, personal history, professional skills. We were creating functional amnesia in healthy people. Dr. Kim's voice dropped to a whisper. When I reported the side effects to Dr. Webb, he told me to continue the trials and document the memory effects. He wanted to develop amnesia-inducing drugs. For interrogation purposes, the military applications were obvious. You could erase a prisoner's memory of classified information, or implant false memories to create double agents. Dr. Webb saw it as the future of intelligence work. Lisa leaned forward. But you said the trials started with volunteers. When did that change? Dr. Kim took a shaky breath. When the volunteers started experiencing permanent neurological damage, recruitment became difficult. Dr. Webb ordered us to expand the program using patients who were already receiving psychiatric treatment. They thought they were getting standard medications, but we were actually testing increasingly powerful versions of the experimental compounds, without their consent, without their knowledge. We partnered with hospitals and clinics across the region, telling administrators that we were conducting FDA-approved studies on treatment-resistant depression. The hospitals received substantial grants, and the patients received what they thought was cutting-edge therapy. Emma thought about the 4 victims she'd examined, all of whom had been receiving mental health treatment. What happened when patients started showing adverse reactions? At first, we documented everything and tried to develop countermeasures, but as the side effects became more severe, psychosis, memory loss, violent behavior, Dr. Webb became concerned about exposure. He implemented what he called containment protocols. Meaning what? Dr. Kim's voice broke slightly. Patients who developed severe reactions or started asking questions about their treatment were classified as security risks. Initially, we just transferred them to different facilities or changed their medications. But when some patients threatened to contact medical boards or journalists, they were eliminated. Lisa finished. Dr. Webb brought in a specialist, someone with experience in what he called problem resolution. Patients who posed security risks would develop sudden, suicidal ideation, usually resulting in death within 24 to 48 hours. Emma felt sick. You're talking about systematic murder. I tried to rationalize it as necessary for national security. Dr. Webb convinced me that these people were casualties in a larger war, that their deaths prevented greater harm to society. Dr. Kim wiped tears from her eyes. It wasn't until my research partner started asking questions about the death rate that I realized how far we'd fallen. What happened to your research partner? Lisa asked, though Emma suspected they already knew the answer. Dr. James Morrison, brilliant researcher, dedicated physician, father of 2 young children. He noticed that patients were dying at an impossible rate and started investigating the statistical anomalies. One morning, he was found dead in his laboratory. Suicide by chemical poisoning. But you didn't believe it was suicide. James was a devout Catholic who considered suicide the ultimate sin. He was also one of the most careful researchers I've ever known. He wouldn't have made the kind of mistake that killed him. But the official investigation concluded that he'd accidentally mixed incompatible chemicals while working late alone. Emma exchanged glances with Lisa. The pattern was consistent. Anyone who questioned the program or threatened to expose it died in suspicious circumstances that were quickly classified as suicide or accident. Dr. Kim, how many people died in total? Emma asked. I don't know exactly. By the time I quit, we had documented over 60 adverse events resulting in death. But Dr. Webb's containment protocols made it impossible to track the real numbers. Some patients were transferred to facilities I didn't have access to. Others simply disappeared from the program without explanation. And all of these deaths were covered up. Dr. Webb had connections throughout the medical and law enforcement communities, coroners who would falsify autopsy reports, police detectives who would close investigations quickly, hospital administrators who would destroy medical records. The Pentagon contract provided cover for everything if anyone asked too many questions. They were told it was classified research related to national security. Lisa pulled out her notebook. Dr. Kim, we need names. Everyone involved in the program, everyone who participated in the cover-ups, everyone who authorized the murders. Dr. Kim hesitated. Detective Crawford, these people have already killed dozens of individuals to protect this secret. If they know I'm talking to you, they already know, Emma said grimly. My apartment was searched last night, and Detective Crawford's our names are on their target list. The only way we survive this is by exposing everything before they can eliminate us. Dr. Kim reached into her purse and pulled out a small USB drive. Everything's on here: research data, financial records, correspondence with Pentagon officials, documentation of every suspicious death connected to the program. I've been carrying it for months, afraid to use it but unable to destroy it. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Lisa asked. Because I was complicit in murder, Detective. I participated in experiments that I knew were harming innocent people. I documented deaths that I knew weren't suicides. I helped create a system that turned medical treatment into a weapon. Dr. Kim's voice was filled with shame and regret. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I just disappeared, maybe the program would end on its own. But it didn't end, Emma said. It got worse. After I quit, Dr. Webb expanded the program to include family members and associates of former test subjects. Anyone who might have second-hand knowledge of the experiments became a potential target. That's when I realized that staying silent made me an accessory to ongoing murder. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Dr. Kim grabbed Emma's arm. Dr. Patterson, you need to understand Dr. Webb isn't just a corrupt researcher. He's a true believer who thinks he's protecting America from its enemies. He'll kill anyone who threatens his mission, and he has the resources and connections to make those deaths look completely natural. Then we'd better make sure we expose him before he gets the chance. Emma replied, pocketing the USB drive that contained the evidence needed to bring down the entire conspiracy. Back at the motel, Emma spread Dr. Kim's files across the small desk while Lisa secured the room and checked for surveillance devices. The USB drive contained over 2 gigabytes of data, research protocols, financial records, correspondence, and most damning of all, detailed documentation of every patient death connected to Project Mind. This is incredible, Emma said, scrolling through medical files on her laptop. Dr. Kim documented everything: dosages, reactions, timeline of symptoms, even postmortem findings for patients who died during the trials. Lisa was examining financial records on her tablet. Look at these payment schedules. Meridian was paying hospitals up to $50,000 per patient enrolled in the program. That explains how they bought so much cooperation. Emma found a folder labeled Adverse Events, Fatal Outcomes, and felt her stomach drop. The spreadsheet contained 127 entries, each representing a patient who had died during or shortly after experimental treatment. The victims ranged in age from 19 to 67. Representing every demographic and geographic area in the region. Lisa, this is genocide. They were systematically killing anyone who couldn't be controlled or silenced. It gets worse, Lisa said, pointing to another document. Dr. Kim kept records of the containment protocols Dr. Webb implemented. Look at this list of approved elimination methods. Emma read over Lisa's shoulder, her medical training helping her understand the implications. The list included drug combinations that would cause heart failure, respiratory depression, or neurological shutdown, all designed to mimic natural causes or voluntary suicide. These are the specific compounds I found in Rodriguez's system, Emma said, pointing to one entry. And this combination would explain the unusual bruising patterns. It causes muscle rigidity that could leave restraint marks even after death. Lisa found correspondence between Dr. Webb and various hospital administrators, revealing the full scope of the conspiracy. Emma, they weren't just experimenting on psychiatric patients. They expanded to include emergency room patients, surgical, recovery patients, even some people who came in for routine procedures. How is that possible? According to these emails, participating hospitals were told they were conducting FDA-approved studies on pain management and recovery acceleration. Patients signed general consent forms for medical treatment, not realizing they were authorizing experimental drug administration. Emma discovered a particularly chilling document, a research proposal Dr. Webb had submitted to the Pentagon requesting approval to expand Project Mindbridge to include preemptive neutralization of potential security threats. Lisa, look at this. Dr. Webb wanted permission to target journalists, activists, and government whistleblowers for experimental treatment. He claimed they could prevent security leaks by inducing selective amnesia in people who had access to classified information. Was the proposal approved? Emma scrolled through the response documents. Partially, the Pentagon approved a pilot program targeting 12 individuals, but required that all subjects appear to die from natural causes or pre-existing conditions. Lisa found the list of pilot program targets, and both women recognized several names: journalists who had died in apparent accidents, government employees who had committed suicide shortly before scheduled testimony, activists who had suffered fatal medical emergencies. This isn't just about covering up illegal drug trials, Lisa realized. Dr. Webb was running an assassination program using experimental pharmaceuticals with Pentagon approval and funding. Emma found Dr. Kim's personal notes from her final months at Meridian, documenting her growing horror at what the program had become. The notes revealed that Dr. Webb had begun discussing plans to use Project Mindbridge technology for population management during national emergencies. He wanted to develop aerosol versions of the drugs for crowd control, Emma read aloud, mass deployment through water supplies or ventilation systems to induce compliance or memory loss in large populations. That's chemical warfare against civilians. Emma discovered video files on the USB drive security camera footage from Meridian laboratories showing patients being administered experimental drugs without their knowledge. In one particularly disturbing video, she watched Rodriguez's girlfriend, nurse Amanda Chen, unknowingly injecting a patient with an experimental compound while believing she was administering standard pain medication. Lisa, this footage proves that hospital staff were unknowing participants in the program. Amanda Chen had no idea she was part of an illegal experiment when she treated these patients, which explains why Rodriguez had to be eliminated. If Amanda had realized what was happening and told him, he could have exposed the entire program. Lisa found encrypted files containing what appeared to be blackmail material: photographs, financial records, and personal information about dozens of officials who had been compromised or coerced into participating in the cover-up. Dr. Webb didn't just buy cooperation, Lisa realized. He collected dirt on everyone involved to ensure their continued silence. Look at these files on judges, prosecutors, medical board members, even state legislators. Emma discovered the most damning evidence in a folder labeled quality control, autopsy photographs, and toxicology. Reports from patients who had died during the trials. The reports showed clear evidence of experimental drug administration, but the official cause of death in each case had been falsified. This proves systematic falsification of medical records. Every one of these deaths was classified as suicide, accident, or natural causes, but the actual evidence shows homicide by poisoning. Lisa was examining communication logs between Dr. Webb and his containment specialist, the person responsible for eliminating security risks. The logs revealed a cold, businesslike approach to murder, with victims categorized by threat level and elimination method. Emma, according to these logs, they're planning to eliminate us within the next 48 hours. Our threat assessment has been upgraded to immediate action required. Emma felt her blood run cold. What's the recommended elimination method? Lisa scrolled through the most recent entries. Apparent murder-suicide. They planned to make it look like I killed you during a confrontation about the investigation, then took my own life out of guilt. How do they plan to accomplish that? According to this, they have people inside the police department who can manipulate evidence and witness statements. The official story will be that I became obsessed with the case, developed a personal relationship with you, and killed you when you threatened to expose my unprofessional conduct. Emma stared at the screen, realizing how thoroughly they'd been outmaneuvered. Dr. Webb's organization had contingency plans for every possible scenario, including the discovery of their activities by law enforcement. Lisa, we can't go to the police with this. They have people everywhere. I know, but we can't run forever either. Dr. Webb's organization has unlimited resources and government protection. Even if we escape the country, they'd eventually find us. Emma looked at the overwhelming evidence spread across the desk: proof of systematic murder, government corruption, and crimes against humanity. The information on Dr. Kim's USB drive could expose one of the most horrific conspiracies in modern American history, but only if they could find a way to make it public before they were eliminated. There has to be someone we can trust, Emma said. Some official or journalist who isn't compromised. Lisa was already thinking ahead. Maybe. But first, we need to make sure this evidence survives even if we don't. We need multiple copies and multiple locations, with instructions for release if anything happens to us. As they prepared to copy the files and develop a distribution plan, Emma noticed something that made her heart skip. The motel parking lot, which had been empty when they arrived, now contained 3 black sedans positioned to block all exits. Through the window, she could see figures moving in the shadows between the vehicles. "Lisa," she whispered, "I think our 48 hours just got cut short." Emma and Lisa quickly gathered the laptops and USB drives, shoving everything into a backpack while watching the figures outside organize into positions around the motel. The trap was professional and thorough, no way out through the parking lot, and probably snipers positioned to cover the rear exit. "The bathroom window," Lisa whispered, checking her service weapon. "It's small, but we might be able to squeeze through." Emma was already moving toward the back of the room, but she stopped when her burner phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was blocked, but somehow she knew who it would be. Dr. Patterson. The voice was calm, cultured, with just a hint of military precision. "My name is Dr. Marcus Webb. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Emma put the phone on speaker so Lisa could hear. "Dr. Webb, I was wondering when you'd introduce yourself. I understand you've been investigating some unfortunate deaths that occurred in our region. Deaths that have been properly investigated and classified by appropriate authorities." "You mean the people you murdered to cover up your illegal experiments?" Dr. Webb's laugh was cold. "Dr. Patterson, you're a medical professional. You understand that sometimes patients die despite our best efforts to save them. The families of these individuals have found peace in knowing their loved ones are no longer suffering." Lisa drew her weapon and moved to the window, checking the positions of the men outside. She held up 3 fingers, then pointed to different locations around the motel. "The families deserve to know the truth," Emma said, trying to keep Dr. Webb talking while they planned their escape. "The truth is a luxury we can't always afford, Dr. Patterson. Sometimes, protecting the greater good requires accepting smaller tragedies. The work we were doing at Meridian could have prevented immense suffering for military personnel and their families. By murdering innocent civilians, by advancing medical science in ways that couldn't be accomplished through conventional research, every breakthrough requires sacrifice, Dr. Patterson. The question is whether those sacrifices are random and meaningless, or purposeful and directed toward a greater goal." Emma noticed that Dr. Webb spoke about the murders with the detached, clinical tone she might use to describe a surgical procedure. To him, the victims weren't people, they were data points in a larger experiment. "What do you want from us, Dr. Webb?" "I want you to understand the impossible position you've put yourselves in. You have evidence of classified research conducted under Pentagon authorization. Releasing that information would constitute espionage and treason. The penalties for those crimes are quite severe." Lisa was gesturing frantically toward the bathroom. She'd managed to open the window and was indicating it was large enough for them to escape through. "On the other hand," Dr. Webb continued, "I'm prepared to offer you an alternative. Dr. Kim has provided you with files that tell only part of the story. I'm willing to share the complete picture, including evidence that would exonerate you of any wrongdoing and provide substantial financial compensation for your cooperation. You want to buy us off? I want to offer you a choice, Dr. Patterson. You can continue this investigation and find yourselves classified as enemy combatants, engaged in espionage against the United States, or you can join a program that could revolutionize medical treatment for trauma victims worldwide." Emma looked at Lisa, who was shaking her head vigorously. The offer was obviously a trap. There was no way Dr. Webb would allow them to live with knowledge of his crimes, regardless of any agreements they might make. "How do I know you're telling the truth about Pentagon authorization?" Emma asked, still stalling for time. "Because I'm going to show you the authorization documents personally, Dr. Patterson. I'm in the parking lot outside your motel room. If you'll allow me to come in and speak with you face to face, I can provide proof that everything we did was legal, necessary, and approved at the highest levels of government." Emma felt her blood run cold. Dr. Webb wasn't just orchestrating their capture, he was personally supervising it, confident enough in his position to reveal himself directly. "And if I refuse to meet with you, then Detective Crawford will be found dead from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. And you'll be found dead from injuries sustained while resisting arrest. The official investigation will conclude that Detective Crawford had become romantically obsessed with you and killed you in a jealous rage before taking her own life." The scenario matched exactly what they'd found in Dr. Kim's files. Dr. Webb had used the same cover story for other eliminations, relying on corrupted investigators to sell the false narrative to the media and public. Lisa was already climbing through the bathroom window, moving as quietly as possible. She gestured for Emma to follow, but Emma hesitated. If they ran now, Dr. Webb would simply hunt them down later. Their only chance was to somehow turn the tables on him. Dr. Webb, I'll meet with you on one condition. You come alone, without your security team. If this research was really legal and justified, you shouldn't need armed backup to discuss it. I'm afraid that's not possible, Dr. Patterson. You and Detective Crawford are considered armed and dangerous suspects in a matter of national security. Standard protocols require a full security detail. Then I guess we have nothing to discuss. Emma ended the call and moved toward the bathroom window, but she could already hear voices in the hallway outside their room. Dr. Webb's team was moving into position for a forced entry, probably planning to use gas or flashbang grenades to disorient them before capture. Lisa had made it through the window and was waiting outside to help Emma through. But as Emma started to climb through the opening, she heard the distinctive sound of the room's door lock being bypassed. They were out of time. Go, Emma whispered to Lisa. Get the evidence to someone who can use it. I'm not leaving you. One of us has to survive to expose this. Go. Emma pushed the backpack containing the laptops and USB drives through the window, then heard the room door open behind her. She tried to follow the backpack through the window, but hands grabbed her legs and pulled her back into the room. Dr. Patterson, Dr. Webb's voice was calm and satisfied. Thank you for making this easy. Emma was pulled away from the window and pushed into a chair. Dr. Webb stood in front of her, a tall, distinguished man in his 50s with gray hair and the bearing of a military officer. He was flanked by 4 men in tactical gear, all armed, with weapons and restraints. Where is Detective Crawford? Dr. Webb asked. I don't know what you're talking about. Dr. Webb nodded to one of his men, who moved to the bathroom window and looked outside. She's gone, sir. Must have escaped during the phone conversation. No matter, we'll find her. Dr. Patterson, you're going to help us locate Detective Crawford and recover the stolen classified materials. I'm not going to help you with anything. Dr. Webb smiled, and Emma saw the cold calculation behind his professional demeanor. Dr. Patterson, I think you misunderstand your situation. You're no longer a civilian investigator. As of this moment, you're a detained enemy combatant in possession of stolen classified information. The rules that normally govern law enforcement don't apply to your case. One of the tactical team members was setting up what looked like medical equipment for stands, monitoring devices, and a case full of pharmaceutical supplies. Emma realized with growing horror that Dr. Webb planned to use his experimental drugs on her. You're going to answer all of our questions, Dr. Patterson. The only choice you have is whether you cooperate voluntarily, or whether we use chemical persuasion to extract the information we need. Emma looked at the medical equipment being assembled and understood that she was about to become another test subject in Dr. Webb's illegal experiments. But unlike the previous victims, she knew exactly what was happening to her, which meant she might be able to find a way to resist or escape. Dr. Webb, she said, trying to project confidence she didn't feel, you're making a mistake. Detective Crawford isn't the only person who knows about your program. If anything happens to us, the evidence will be released automatically. Dr. Webb's smile never wavered. Dr. Patterson, in about 5 minutes, you're going to tell me exactly who else knows about our work and how they can be contacted. You'll also provide detailed information about where evidence has been stored and how it can be recovered. You'll do this because the alternative is considerably more unpleasant than cooperation. As the medical technician prepared the IV equipment, Emma realized that her investigation had reached its most dangerous point. She was about to learn firsthand what Dr. Webb's other victims had experienced in their final moments, and she could only hope that Lisa had escaped with enough evidence to expose the truth. Lisa Crawford crouched behind a dumpster in the alley behind the motel, clutching the backpack containing the evidence, while listening to voices and footsteps, searching the area around her. She'd managed to escape through the bathroom window, just moments before Dr. Webb's team had entered the room. But she knew they would find her quickly if she didn't move. Her police training kicked in as she assessed the situation. Multiple armed hostiles, professional equipment, coordinated search. This wasn't a typical law enforcement operation. These men moved like military contractors, probably with experience in overseas operations, where civilian casualties were acceptable losses. Lisa pulled out her burner phone and scrolled through her contacts, looking for someone she could trust. With the evidence, her usual police contacts were potentially compromised, and she couldn't risk going through official channels that might be monitored by Dr. Webb's people. She settled on Marcus Thompson, an investigative journalist with the Washington Herald who specialized in government corruption cases. Thompson had worked with her before on stories involving police misconduct, and he'd always been careful to protect his sources. More importantly, he had the resources and platform needed to make the evidence public quickly. Thompson, the voice, answered on the second ring. Marcus, this is Detective Lisa Crawford. I need your help with the biggest story of your career, but I'm in immediate danger and can't explain everything over the phone. Lisa, where are you? You sound, Marcus. I'm sending you files that document systematic murder and government corruption. If something happens to me, you have to publish everything immediately. Do you understand? There was a pause as Thompson processed the urgency in her voice. Lisa, what kind of trouble are you in? The kind that gets journalists killed if they ask too many questions. Marcus, I'm uploading files to a secure server right now. The access codes are in an email I'm sending to your personal account. Promise me that if I don't contact you within 24 hours, you'll publish everything. Lisa, maybe you should come to my office so we can. There's no time. They have my partner, and they're going to kill both of us if this information doesn't go public. Marcus, these files document over 127 murders committed by a pharmaceutical company with Pentagon support. This is genocide disguised as medical research. Lisa could hear search teams getting closer to her position. She had to move, but first she needed to ensure the evidence would survive even if she didn't. I'm uploading everything now, she whispered into the phone. Financial records, research data, correspondence with government officials, video evidence of illegal human experimentation. Marcus, these people have been murdering civilians for 2 years and covering it up through corrupted medical and law enforcement systems. Jesus, Lisa, are you sure about this? I've seen the bodies, Marcus. I've seen the falsified autopsy reports. I've talked to a whistleblower who documented everything from the inside. This is real, and it's happening right now. Lisa finished uploading the files and began moving deeper into the alley, trying to put distance between herself and the search teams. Her phone buzzed with a confirmation that Thompson had received the files and access codes. Lisa, I'm looking at some of these documents. If this is real, it's going to bring down people at the highest levels of government. That's exactly why they're trying to kill us. Marcus, start working on this story now, but don't publish anything until you're sure I'm dead or captured. If they think the information is already public, they might decide to cut their losses and run. Lisa reached the end of the alley and carefully peered around the corner. The street was busy with normal traffic, providing cover for her to blend into the civilian population, but she also spotted 2 black SUVs parked at strategic locations, probably containing additional security teams. Marcus, I need you to do something else. Contact FBI agent Patricia Santosius, the sister of one of the victims, and works in the Federal Organized Crime Unit. Tell her everything I've sent you and ask her to begin an independent investigation. FBI agent Santos got it. Lisa, where are you going now? I'm going to try to rescue my partner and gather additional evidence. If I don't succeed, at least the truth will come out. Lisa ended the call and began moving through the crowd on the street, using her knowledge of the city to navigate to the motel through back alleys and side streets. She needed to get close enough to observe Dr. Webb's operation and look for an opportunity to rescue Emma. As she walked, Lisa called Agent Santos using her burner phone. The call went to voicemail, so she left a detailed message explaining the situation and providing Thompson's contact information. If anything happened to her, at least there would be 2 independent sources working to expose the conspiracy. 20 minutes later, Lisa had positioned herself in an abandoned office building across from the motel, using binoculars to observe Dr. Webb's operation. Through the window of Emma's room, she could see medical equipment being set up and several figures moving around what appeared to be an improvised laboratory. Lisa's blood ran cold as she realized what she was witnessing. Dr. Webb wasn't just planning to interrogate Emma, he was going to use her as a test subject for his experimental drugs. She was about to watch her partner become another victim of the same program they'd been investigating. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thompson. Files received and verified. This is incredible. How soon do you need publication? Lisa typed back, stand by. Going to attempt rescue. If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, publish everything. Lisa, this is suicide. Call the FBI. Call the state police. Call someone with backup and resources. They have people everywhere. Publishing the evidence is our only chance. Lisa put away her phone and began planning her approach to the motel. Dr. Webb's security team had positioned sentries at all obvious entry points, but they were focused on preventing escape rather than defending against an assault. If she could create a distraction and approach from an unexpected direction, she might be able to reach Emma before they could complete whatever they were planning. She noticed a propane tank behind the motel's restaurant, positioned near the building's rear wall. If she could cause an explosion in that area, it would force Dr. Webb's team to respond to the emergency, creating an opportunity for her to enter through the front of the building. Lisa checked her service weapon and confirmed she had 2 full magazines of ammunition. Whatever happened next, she was committed to rescuing Emma and gathering additional evidence, even if it cost her life. Too many people had already died to protect Dr. Webb's secrets, and she wasn't going to let Emma become another victim. She prepared to move toward the motel. Lisa's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Detective Crawford, this is Agent Patricia Santos. I received your message, and I'm currently en route to your location with a federal tactical team. Do not attempt a rescue operation on your own. Lisa felt a surge of hope. Agent Santos, how did you find me? I've been investigating my sister's death independently for months. When I received your evidence files through Marcus Thompson, everything finally made sense. We have Dr. Webb's operation under surveillance, and we're prepared to move in. They're going to kill Dr. Patterson if we don't act immediately. We're moving now. Detective Crawford, stay in your current position and do not engage. We have this situation under control. Lisa could see federal vehicles approaching the motel from multiple directions, moving with the coordinated precision of a major law enforcement operation. After weeks of feeling isolated and outmaneuvered, she finally had backup with the resources and authority needed to take down Dr. Webb's conspiracy. But even as relief flooded through her, Lisa kept her binoculars focused on Emma's room, watching for any sign that Dr. Webb's team was accelerating their timeline in response to the approaching federal agents. Emma sat strapped to the chair while Dr. Webb's medical technician prepared the IV equipment, her mind racing through everything she knew about the experimental drugs they were about to use on her. From Dr. Kim's research files, she understood that the compounds would not only force her to reveal information, but would likely cause permanent neurological damage or death. Dr. Patterson, Dr. Webb said, reviewing a tablet that displayed her medical history, I want you to understand that what we're about to do isn't personal. You've forced us into this situation by refusing to accept a reasonable compromise. You call murder a reasonable compromise. Dr. Webb set down the tablet and looked at her with what appeared to be genuine puzzlement. Dr. Patterson, you're a medical professional. You understand that medical advancement requires testing, and testing sometimes results in unexpected outcomes. Would you prefer that our military personnel continue to suffer from untreatable PTSD while we wait for conventional research methods to produce results? Emma stared at him, realizing that Dr. Webb genuinely believed his own justifications. He'd convinced himself that murdering civilians was acceptable if it served what he perceived as a greater good. Those people didn't volunteer to be test subjects. They came to hospitals seeking help for depression and anxiety, and you turned them into experimental animals. They received cutting-edge treatment that conventional medicine couldn't provide. Many of them showed significant improvement before the adverse reactions occurred. In a traditional clinical trial, we would have had to wait years to achieve the same results. The medical technician finished setting up the 4 and approached Emma with a syringe containing a clear liquid. She recognized the compound from Dr. Kim's researcher, fast-acting agent that would compromise her ability to lie or withhold information while causing progressive brain damage. Dr. Webb, Emma said desperately, even if your research goals were legitimate, the methods you've used are criminal. You could have conducted proper clinical trials with informed consent. Informed consent is a luxury we couldn't afford. Dr. Patterson, the Pentagon needed results quickly, and traditional research protocols would have taken decades to produce actionable intelligence. Dr. Webb nodded to the technician, who began approaching Emma with the syringe. But before he could reach her, the sound of vehicles approaching at high speed came through the motel room windows. Dr. Webb moved to the window and looked outside, his expression immediately shifting to alarm. Federal agents, one of his security team reported through a radio. Multiple vehicles, tactical teams, full assault formation. Dr. Webb's composed demeanor cracked for the first time since Emma had met him. How did they find us? Our intelligence indicated no federal interest in this case. Emma felt a surge of hope. Detective Crawford must have contacted someone you don't control. Dr. Webb turned back to Emma, his eyes cold with calculation. It doesn't matter. By the time they breach this room, you'll have given us everything we need to know, and the evidence trail will lead nowhere. He gestured to the technician, who moved quickly toward Emma with the syringe. But as he reached for her arm, Emma made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of trying to pull away, she leaned forward and spoke directly to the technician. "Look at me," she said urgently. "You're about to inject a compound that will cause irreversible brain damage. I'm a medical professional, just like you. Is this really what you became a medic to do?" The technician hesitated, his hand pausing inches from Emma's arm. For just a moment, Emma saw uncertainty in his eyes, the conflict between following orders and violating his medical oath. "Proceed with the injection," Dr. Webb ordered sharply, but the technician was staring at Emma, clearly struggling with the moral implications of what he'd been asked to do. "Sir, maybe we should consider alternative interrogation methods. The injection is the most efficient method available. Proceed immediately." The sound of boots in the hallway was getting louder, and Emma could hear orders being shouted through bullhorns outside. The federal agents were preparing to storm the building, and Dr. Webb was running out of time. "Think about why you became a medic," Emma continued, speaking directly to the technician while Dr. Webb grew increasingly agitated. "You took an oath to do no harm. This compound will destroy my brain even if it forces me to answer your questions." The technician looked at Dr. Webb, then back at Emma. "Sir, perhaps we could use conventional interrogation techniques. The subject appears willing to cooperate. The injection ensures complete compliance without the possibility of deception," Dr. Webb snapped. "Follow your orders." But Emma could see that her words had affected the technician. His hands were shaking slightly, and he kept glancing toward the door as if considering his options. "What's your name?" Emma asked gently. "Corporal James Mitchell," he replied automatically. "Corporal Mitchell, how many people have you seen die from these experimental drugs?" The question hung in the air as Mitchell's face went pale. Emma realized he'd been present for other interrogations, other test subjects who had been killed by the compounds he'd administered. The subjects were enemy combatants and security threats. Dr. Webb interjected. "Their deaths served the greater good of national security." "Were they," Emma asked Mitchell directly, "were they really enemy combatants, or were they just ordinary people who asked the wrong questions?" Mitchell's hands were visibly shaking now. I was told they were terrorists and spies." "Corporal Mitchell, I'm a medical examiner's assistant. Detective Crawford is a police officer investigating suspicious deaths. Dr. Kim is a researcher who discovered your program was killing innocent people. We're not terrorists, we're Americans trying to protect other Americans from being murdered." The sound of explosive charges detonating came from somewhere else in the building. The federal agents were making their entry, and Dr. Webb was clearly running out of time and patience. "Inject her now, or I'll have you court-martialed for disobeying direct orders," Dr. Webb threatened. Mitchell looked at the syringe in his hands, then at Emma, then at Dr. Webb. For a moment, Emma thought he would follow his orders and complete the injection. But then he set the syringe down on the medical cart and stepped back. "Sir, I can't do this. These aren't enemy combatants. This is murder." Dr. Webb's mask of professional composure finally slipped completely. He pulled a pistol from his jacket and aimed it at Mitchell. "Corporal, you have 5 seconds to complete the injection, or I'll shoot you for treason and complete it myself." Mitchell raised his hands and backed away from the medical equipment. "Dr. Webb, this has gone too far. I became a medic to save lives, not to torture innocent people." The motel room door exploded inward as federal agents breached the entrance. Dr. Webb spun toward the door, still holding his weapon, while his security team reached for their own guns. Emma threw herself sideways in the chair, trying to get out of the line of fire as the room erupted in gunfire. When the shooting stopped, Dr. Webb was on the floor, with blood spreading from a chest wound, while his security team had surrendered. Without firing a shot, Corporal Mitchell was sitting against the wall with his hands raised, clearly relieved that the confrontation was over. Agent Patricia Santos entered the room and immediately moved to check on Emma. "Dr. Patterson, are you injured?" "I'm okay," Emma said as Santos cut the restraints that had held her to the chair. "Corporal Mitchell refused to inject me with the experimental drugs. He may have saved my life. Santos looked at Mitchell, who was being restrained by other agents. Corporal, we're going to need your full cooperation in documenting everything you witnessed during your time with Dr. Webb's program. Mitchell nodded eagerly. Yes, ma'am. I want to help. I should have spoken up sooner about what we were doing to those people. As Emma was helped to her feet, she realized that the investigation that had started with 3 suspicious autopsy cases had exposed one of the most horrific criminal conspiracies in modern American history. Dr. Webb's program had murdered over 127 innocent people, corrupted dozens of officials, and violated every ethical standard of medical research. But perhaps most importantly, it had shown that even in the darkest circumstances, individuals still had the power to choose between right and wrong. Corporal Mitchell's refusal to follow illegal orders had not only saved Emma's life, but had provided crucial testimony that would help prosecute everyone involved in the conspiracy. The moral choice, Emma realized, wasn't always easy to make, but it was always worth making. 2 weeks after Dr. Webb's arrest, Emma sat in a sterile FBI conference room wearing a wire provided by Agent Patricia Santos. The plan was risky but necessary. Dr. Harrison had agreed to cooperate with the federal investigation in exchange for immunity, and his testimony would be crucial for exposing the full scope of the conspiracy. Dr. Patterson, Agent Santos said, adjusting the small recording device hidden beneath Emma's shirt. Remember that Dr. Harrison doesn't know we've arrested Dr. Webb or that Corporal Mitchell has provided detailed testimony about the program. As far as he knows, you're still investigating independently. Emma nodded, though her hands were shaking slightly. After everything she'd been through, the prospect of confronting her former mentor filled her with a mixture of anger and sadness. Harrison had been complicit in over 127 murders, but he'd also been coerced and manipulated by people far more powerful than himself. What exactly do you need him to admit? Emma asked. We need him to detail the specific mechanism of the cover-up operation, Agent Santos replied. How the cases were processed, who gave the orders, how the falsified reports were created and distributed. Dr. Webb is claiming that all hospital personnel were unwitting participants who had no knowledge of the true nature of the program. Detective Lisa Crawford, who had been monitoring the conversation from across the room, joined them at the table. Emma Harrison's attorney has already indicated that he's willing to provide full disclosure in exchange for immunity. He wants to clear his conscience and make amends for what he's done. But we need the testimony on record, Agent Santos continued, a formal confession that details his knowing participation in the cover-up. Without that, his immunity agreement is void, and he faces charges for accessory to murder in 127 cases. Emma understood the stakes. If Harrison claimed he was an unwitting participant who had been deceived about the nature of the program, he might escape prosecution entirely. But if he admitted to knowingly falsifying autopsy reports and participating in a murder cover-up, his testimony would be enough to convict dozens of other conspirators. Where are we meeting him? Emma asked. His office at the hospital, Lisa replied. He's agreed to show you exactly how the falsified reports were created and to provide access to the hidden files that document the real cause of death for each victim. Agent Santos handed Emma a small earpiece that would allow the FBI team to monitor the conversation and provide guidance. Dr. Patterson, it's important that you remain calm and professional. Harrison is more likely to provide detailed admissions if he believes you're still his friend and colleague rather than an adversary. Emma pocketed the earpiece and stood up, feeling the weight of responsibility for bringing justice to the victims and their families. What happens if Harrison realizes I'm wearing a wire or suspects this is a setup? Then he'll probably stop talking and demand to speak with his attorney, Agent Santos said. But based on our psychological profile, we believe Harrison genuinely wants to confess his role in the conspiracy. The guilt has been eating at him for months, and your investigation provided him with an opportunity to finally tell the truth. Lisa walked Emma to the parking garage where an unmarked FBI vehicle was waiting. Emma, I want you to know how proud I am of what you've accomplished. 2 weeks ago, we had 3 suspicious deaths and no leads. Now we're about to bring down a conspiracy that murdered over 100 people. It's not over yet, Emma replied. Harrison was just a small piece of this. The real criminals are the people who designed and funded the program, and we'll get them too. But first, we need Harrison's confession to establish the pattern of corruption and cover-up. His testimony will open the door to prosecuting everyone else involved. As Emma drove to the hospital, she thought about all the victims whose deaths Harrison had helped cover up: Jennifer Walsh, David Chun, Maria Santos, Mikhail Rodriguez, all young people with their whole lives ahead of them, killed because they had inadvertently threatened a criminal conspiracy. But she also thought about Harrison himself, a man who had dedicated his career to finding truth for grieving families, only to be corrupted and coerced into becoming an accessory to murder. The tragedy wasn't just what had happened to the victims, but what the conspiracy had done to good people like Harrison, who had been forced to choose between their integrity and their safety. Emma parked in the hospital garage and made her way to the medical examiner's office, noting how strange it felt to return to the place where her investigation had begun. The same fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the same antiseptic smell filled the corridors, but everything had changed since she'd first noticed the unusual bruising patterns that had started this whole nightmare. Dr. Harrison was waiting in his office, looking older and more haggard than she'd ever seen him. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Emma," he said, standing up when she entered, "thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult for you, given everything that's happened." "Dr. Harrison, I just want to understand what really happened to those patients. Their families deserve to know the truth." Harrison gestured for her to sit down, then closed the office door and activated a white noise machine he'd apparently installed recently. "Emma, before we begin, I need you to understand that I never intended for any of this to happen. When I first agreed to participate in the program, I thought I was helping to advance medical research that could save lives." Emma activated the recording device hidden in her shirt and settled into her chair. "What program, Dr. Harrison? I need you to explain everything from the beginning." Harrison took a deep breath and began what would become the most important confession in the history of American medical crime. "It started 2 years ago, when representatives from Meridian Labs approached me about participating in a classified research program funded by the Pentagon." As Harrison began to detail his role in the conspiracy, Emma realized that she was finally going to get the complete truth about how over 100 innocent people had been murdered and their deaths covered up by the very institutions that were supposed to protect them. Dr. Harrison's confession lasted over 2 hours, during which he provided detailed testimony about his role in falsifying autopsy reports, destroying evidence, and covering up murders for Meridian Labs. Emma listened with a mixture of horror and sympathy as her former mentor described how he'd been gradually drawn into the conspiracy. "The first case seemed legitimate," Harrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A federal witness who had supposedly committed suicide before he could testify in a terrorism case. I was told that expedited processing was necessary for national security reasons and that certain details needed to be classified." "What made you suspicious?" Emma asked, though she could see from Harrison's expression that he'd known something was wrong from the beginning. "The autopsy findings didn't match the reported circumstances of death. The witness had been found hanging, but the ligature marks indicated he'd been strangled manually before the rope was applied. When I reported the discrepancy, I was told that the witness had been involved in a struggle with federal agents who were trying to prevent his suicide." Harrison pulled out a hidden file from his locked desk drawer, revealing documents that Emma had never seen before. "I kept copies of the original autopsy findings for every case, including photographs and toxicology results that were never included in the official reports." Emma examined the documents, recognizing the same patterns she'd observed in the recent cases. "Dr. Harrison, these findings show clear evidence of homicide. Why didn't you report them to the authorities?" "Because I was told the authorities already knew." Dr. Webb showed me authorization documents from the Department of Defense, signed by officials at the highest levels of government. He convinced me that these deaths were the unfortunate but necessary result of preventing greater harm to national security. Harrison opened another file, this one containing financial records that showed payments from Meridian Labs to his personal bank account. They also made it clear that my cooperation would be well compensated, and that my family's safety depended on my discretion. Emma felt sick as she realized the full scope of Harrison's corruption. "How many cases, Dr. Harrison? How many autopsy reports did you falsify?" 47 cases over 2 years. Each one was presented to me as a special circumstance requiring expedited processing and classified documentation. It wasn't until the pattern became undeniable that I realized I was participating in systematic murder. When did you realize the truth? Harrison's voice broke slightly as he answered. When Michael Rodriguez came in. He was just a teacher, Emma. He had no connection to terrorism or national security. He'd been asking questions about unusual drug protocols he'd heard about from his girlfriend, and they killed him for it. Emma remembered examining Rodriguez's body, finding the defensive wounds and injection marks that told the story of his final moments. Why didn't you come forward then? Because by that point, I was in too deep. Dr. Webb made it clear that if I tried to expose the program, I would be charged as an accessory to murder in all 47 cases. My wife, my grandchildren, they would have been left with nothing, while I spent the rest of my life in prison. Harrison pulled out a laptop computer and opened encrypted files that contained the complete documentation of his participation in the cover-up. Emma, I've been living in hell for months, knowing that I helped them murder innocent people. When you started asking questions about the recent cases, I saw it as an opportunity to finally do the right thing. Is that why you warned me about the danger? I hoped I could scare you away from the investigation before they decided to eliminate you. But I also knew that if you persisted, you might be able to expose the truth in a way that I never could. Emma watched as Harrison opened file after file, revealing evidence that would convict dozens of conspirators and expose the full scope of Meridian's criminal program. The documentation included correspondence with government officials, financial records showing payments to corrupted authorities, and detailed protocols for eliminating security threats. Dr. Harrison, who else was involved in the cover-up at this hospital? Dr. Rebecca Chen, in toxicology, she was paid to omit certain compounds from the standard testing panels. Detective Mark Burke in the police department, he ensured that suspicious death investigations were closed quickly without thorough examination. Judge Patricia Williams, she signed court orders sealing autopsy records that might have revealed inconsistencies. The scope of corruption was staggering. Emma realized that Dr. Webb had systematically compromised officials at every level of the medical and legal system, creating a network that could cover up virtually any crime. Emma, Harrison said, looking directly at her for the first time during the confession, I know I can never make amends for what I've done. Those families will never get their loved ones back, and they'll never fully recover from the pain of believing their relatives committed suicide. Some of them might find peace in knowing the truth, Emma replied. At least they'll know that their loved ones didn't choose to die, that they were victims rather than people who gave up on life. Harrison nodded, tears streaming down his face. I've prepared a complete statement detailing my participation in the conspiracy, along with copies of all the evidence I've accumulated over the past 2 years. I'm ready to testify against everyone involved, regardless of the consequences for myself. Emma looked at the overwhelming evidence spread across Harrison's desk, proof of systematic murder, government corruption, and institutional failure that would expose one of the most horrific criminal conspiracies in American history. Dr. Harrison, there's something I need to tell you. Dr. Webb has already been arrested, and the FBI is preparing to file charges against everyone involved in the program. Your cooperation today will be crucial for ensuring that justice is served. Harrison looked up sharply. Dr. Webb has been arrested. When did that happen? 2 weeks ago. Detective Crawford and I gathered enough evidence to trigger a federal investigation. The authorities have been building cases against all the conspirators while keeping the arrests quiet to prevent evidence from being destroyed. For the first time since Emma had entered his office, Harrison smiled slightly. Then, it's really over. The program is finished, and the victims will finally get justice. It's over, Dr. Harrison. But the healing is just beginning. As Emma prepared to leave with copies of all the evidence Harrison had provided, she realized that his confession represented more than just legal testimony. It was a man's attempt to reclaim his integrity after months of moral compromise. Harrison would face serious legal consequences for his participation in the conspiracy, but he would also be remembered as the person whose final testimony helped bring down the entire criminal network. Emma, Harrison said as she reached the door, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. You did what I should have done 2 years ago. You chose to fight for the truth, regardless of the personal cost. Emma turned back to her former mentor, seeing not the corrupted official who had helped cover up murder, but the dedicated physician who had taught her the importance of thoroughness and integrity in their work. We all make choices, Dr. Harrison. What matters is that in the end, You chose to do the right thing. Emma watched from an FBI surveillance vehicle as federal agents simultaneously raided 12 locations across the City Meridian Labs headquarters, participating hospitals, corrupted officials, homes, and evidence storage facilities. Agent Patricia Santos had coordinated the operation to occur at exactly 6 a.m., when most of the conspirators would be at home and unable to communicate with each other or destroy evidence. All teams report ready, came the voice through Santos's radio. Execute warrants in 3, 2, 1, go. Emma could see the Meridian Labs building through binoculars as tactical teams breached the main entrance and secured the lobby. Other teams were simultaneously entering through multiple access points, following building plans that Dr. Kim had provided during her debriefing sessions. Team Alpha has secured the executive offices, reported one team leader. We have Dr. Webb's computer systems and filing cabinets. No resistance encountered. Team Bravo has the research laboratories, multiple subjects in custody, extensive computer equipment seized. Emma felt a surge of satisfaction as she watched Meridian employees being led out of the building in handcuffs. These were the people who had designed and implemented a program that murdered over 127 innocent civilians, and they were finally being held accountable for their crimes. Agent Santos turned to Emma from the front seat. Dr. Patterson, we're also executing search warrants at 6 hospitals that participated in the program. Your evidence and Dr. Harrison's testimony provided probable cause for seizure of all medical records, financial documents, and correspondence related to Project Mindbridge. Through her earpiece, Emma could hear progress reports from teams at various hospitals. Dr. Rebecca Chen from toxicology had been arrested at her home, along with several hospital administrators who had accepted payments for allowing Meridian to use their patients as unwitting test subjects. Detective Crawford is leading the team at City General Hospital, Santos continued. They're seizing the medical records for all patients who died under suspicious circumstances over the past 2 years. Emma watched as evidence boxers were carried out of the Meridian building, computers, files, research equipment, and financial records that would provide a complete picture of the conspiracy. The scale of the operation was impressive, involving over 200 federal agents and coordinated with multiple law enforcement agencies. Agent Santos, Emma said, what about the government officials who authorized or covered up the program? Are they being arrested too? That's more complicated, Santos replied grimly. Some of the Pentagon officials involved are claiming they were deceived about the true nature of the research. Others are asserting executive privilege and national security exemptions. It's going to take months to sort out the political implications. Emma felt frustrated but not surprised. The people at the top of the conspiracy would likely find ways to avoid prosecution, while the lower-level participants faced serious prison time. But at least the murders would stop, and the victims' families would finally learn the truth. Through the radio, Emma heard Detective Crawford's voice. Evidence team has found a hidden server room at City General containing backup copies of all the falsified autopsy reports. Dr. Harrison wasn't the only one keeping records of the real findings. Excellent work, Santos responded. Package everything for forensic analysis. Emma's phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Thompson, the journalist who had helped expose the conspiracy. Breaking news story goes live in 30 minutes. Federal sources confirm 127 murder victims, dozens of arrests. Your courage saved lives. Emma showed the message to Agent Santos, who nodded approvingly. The media coverage will ensure that this story doesn't get buried or forgotten. Public attention is often the best protection against political cover-ups. As the morning progressed, Emma watched a steady stream of suspects being arrested and evidence being collected. The operation was methodical and thorough, designed to dismantle the entire conspiracy network in a single coordinated action. Team Charlie reports successful arrest of Judge Patricia Williams. Came another radio update. She attempted to destroy documents in her home office, but was stopped before significant evidence was lost. Emma thought about all the families who had been told their loved ones committed suicide, who had spent months or years blaming themselves for failing to recognize warning signs that never existed. Today's arrests wouldn't bring back the victims, but they would provide closure and justice that had been denied for too long. Dr. Patterson, Agent Santos said, we're going to need your continued cooperation over the next several months as we prepare for trial. Your testimony will be crucial for helping juries understand the medical evidence and the systematic nature of the cover-up. I'll do whatever is necessary, Emma replied. These victims deserved justice, and their families deserved the truth. Through her binoculars, Emma could see Dr. Webb being led out of a federal courthouse where he'd been held since his arrest. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit and restraints, a far cry from the confident, professional appearance he'd maintained during their confrontation at the motel. "What charges is Dr. Webb facing?" Emma asked. "Murder in the first degree for 127 counts, conspiracy to commit murder, violation of medical ethics, fraud, and about 50 other charges related to the cover-up operation," Santos replied. "If convicted on all counts, he'll spend the rest of his life in prison without possibility of parole." Emma felt a sense of closure, watching the man who had orchestrated so much death and suffering being held accountable for his crimes, but she also felt sadness for all the lives that had been lost, and the trust that had been betrayed by institutions that were supposed to protect public health and safety. "Agent Santos, what happens to the families of the victims? How do we tell them that their loved ones were murdered when they'd been told for months that they committed suicide?" "That's going to be one of the most difficult aspects of this case," Santos admitted. "We have victim advocates who specialize in delivering this kind of news. But there's no easy way to tell someone that their grief has been based on a lie." Thought about Michael Rodriguez's mother, who had probably spent months wondering what she could have done differently to prevent her son's suicide. Learning that he had actually been murdered might provide some relief from self-blame, but it would also open new wounds and raise painful questions about justice and trust. As the raids concluded and the evidence was transported to FBI facilities for analysis, Emma realized that her investigation had accomplished something she'd never imagined possible: the complete exposure and dismantling of a criminal conspiracy that had operated with impunity for over 2 years. But the hardest work was still ahead, helping the victims' families understand what had really happened to their loved ones, ensuring that the perpetrators faced appropriate punishment, and rebuilding trust in the medical and legal institutions that had been corrupted by the conspiracy. "Dr. Patterson," Agent Santos said as they prepared to leave the surveillance location, "you should know that your actions have probably prevented dozens or even hundreds of additional murders. Dr. Webb's program was expanding, and there's no telling how many more people would have died if you hadn't exposed the truth." Emma looked back at the Meridian Labs building one final time, knowing that the nightmare that had begun with 3 suspicious autopsy cases was finally coming to an end. 6 months later, Emma sat in the witness box of Federal District Court, facing a jury that would decide the fate of Dr. Marcus Webb and his co-conspirators. The trial had lasted 3 weeks, with testimony from over 40 witnesses and evidence that filled dozens of boxes. The case had attracted national media attention and sparked congressional investigations into oversight of classified medical research. "Dr. Patterson," the prosecutor said, approaching the witness stand, "please tell the jury what you observed when you examined the body of Michael Rodriguez on the morning of March 15th. Emma had given this testimony dozens of times during depositions and pre-trial hearings, but it never got easier to describe the evidence of Rodriguez's final moments. "I observed defensive wounds on his knuckles consistent with a struggle, ligature marks that indicated manual strangulation before hanging, and puncture marks from a large-gauge needle used to administer an experimental sedative." "And what did these findings tell you about the circumstances of Mr. Rodriguez's death? That he had been murdered, not suicide as claimed in the official police report?" Emma looked across the courtroom at Dr. Webb, who sat impassively at the defense table. During the months of investigation and trial preparation, she'd learned more about his background: decorated military physician who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan before transitioning to civilian research. The prosecutor had argued that Webb's military experience had made him view civilian casualties as acceptable losses in a larger war. "Dr. Patterson, did you find similar evidence in the other cases you examined?" "Yes. Jennifer Walsh, David Chen, and Maria Santos all showed physical evidence inconsistent with suicide. All 3 had been administered experimental drugs before their deaths, and all 3 had ligature marks indicating they were murdered." The defense attorney had tried to argue that the victims were willing participants in classified research, who had died from unexpected adverse reactions, but Emma's testimony, combined with evidence from Dr. Kim and Corporal Mitchell, had established that the victims had no knowledge they were being used as test subjects. "Dr. Patterson, in your professional opinion, how many of the 127 documented deaths were actually murders disguised as suicide?" "All of them. The pattern of physical evidence, combined with the falsified autopsy reports and cover-up activities, demonstrates systematic homicide over a period of 2 years. Emma's testimony concluded after 2 hours of examination and cross-examination. As she left the witness stand, she saw the faces of family members who had packed the courtroom gallery: parents, spouses, children, and siblings of the victims, who had finally learned the truth about what happened to their loved ones. The jury deliberated for 4 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against Dr. Webb and his primary The judge sentenced Webb to life in prison without parole, calling his crimes a betrayal of medical ethics and human decency that defies comprehension. Dr. Harrison received a reduced sentence of 10 years in exchange for his cooperation, while other hospital officials received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years depending on their level of involvement. Several government officials were forced to resign, though most avoided criminal prosecution by claiming they had been deceived about the nature of the research. After the sentencing hearing, Emma joined Detective Crawford and Agent Santos on the courthouse steps, where they were met by families of the victims and members of the media. Dr. Patterson called out a reporter from the Washington Herald. "What message do you have for other medical professionals who might witness similar corruption?" Emma thought carefully before responding. "The truth is worth fighting for, even when it's dangerous or difficult to pursue. We have an obligation to the people who trust us with their lives and their loved ones' lives. That obligation doesn't end when it becomes inconvenient or risky." Later that evening, Emma attended a memorial service organized by the victims' families. One by one, family members stood to share memories of their loved ones and to thank Emma, Lisa, and the other investigators who had exposed the truth. Michael Rodriguez's mother, Carmen, approached Emma after the service. "Dr. Patterson, I spent months blaming myself for my son's death, wondering what I could have done differently to save him. Learning that he was murdered was painful, but it also freed me from guilt that wasn't mine to carry." "Your son died because he was trying to protect other people," Emma replied. "He found out about the illegal experiments and was going to report them to the authorities. He was a hero, Mrs. Rodriguez." Carmen Rodriguez smiled through her tears. "Thank you for giving me my son back. Not his life, but his memory, his dignity, his truth." Similar conversations took place throughout the evening as Emma met family members who had been living with false guilt and unanswered questions for months. The truth hadn't brought their loved ones back, but it had provided closure and the knowledge that their relatives had died as victims, rather than people who had given up on life. Dr. Sarah Kim, who had been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, approached Emma near the end of the evening. "Dr. Patterson, I've been offered a position with the CDC to help develop new oversight protocols for classified medical research. I want to make sure this kind of program can never operate again." "That's important work," Emma replied. "The victims deserve to know that their deaths led to meaningful changes in how we protect research subjects." As the memorial service concluded, Emma reflected on how much had changed since she'd first noticed the unusual bruising patterns that had started her investigation. The conspiracy had been exposed, the perpetrators had been prosecuted, and new safeguards had been implemented to prevent similar abuses. But perhaps most importantly, 127 families had learned the truth about what happened to their loved ones. They knew that their relatives hadn't chosen to die, that they had been victims of a criminal conspiracy rather than people who had lost hope. That knowledge couldn't bring back the dead, but it could help the living find peace and continue their own lives without the burden of false guilt. Emma looked around the memorial service at the faces of family members who were grieving but no longer alone in their grief. They had found community with each other and closure through the truth, even though that truth was painful and difficult to accept. "Dr. Patterson," Detective Crawford said, joining her near the memorial display of photographs showing all 127 victims, "are you ready to go back to work tomorrow?" Emma smiled for the first time in months. "Yes, I think I am, but I'm going to approach every case differently now. I'm going to remember that behind every body on that examination table is a family that deserves the truth, no matter how difficult that truth might be to uncover." As Emma left the memorial service and drove home through the city, she knew that her work as a medical examiner's assistant would never be routine again. She would always be looking for the details that others might miss, the inconsistencies that might reveal larger truths, the evidence that could provide justice for victims and closure for families. The investigation that had begun with 3 suspicious deaths had ended with justice for 127 murder victims and their families. It was the most important work Emma had ever done, and it had shown her that one person's commitment to the truth could make a difference in the lives of countless others. 6 months after the trial concluded, Emma stood in her new office at the state medical examiner's facility, looking out at the city where she'd uncovered one of the most horrific criminal conspiracies in modern American history. The view was different from her old workplace, but the mission remained the same: finding truth for the dead and closure for the living. Her promotion to senior medical examiner had come with new responsibilities and reformed oversight protocols designed to prevent the kind of corruption that had enabled Dr. Webb's program. Every suspicious death now required review by multiple independent examiners, and all autopsy findings were subject to mandatory secondary confirmation before official cause of death could be determined. Emma's desk held a framed photograph of all 127 victims, a daily reminder of why thoroughness and integrity mattered in her work. Next to it sat a stack of case files that represented her new caseload, deaths that families were counting on her to investigate with the same dedication she'd shown during the Meridian investigation. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Detective Lisa Crawford entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the smile of someone who had found peace after months of struggle. "How's the new job treating you?" Lisa asked, settling into the chair across from Emma's desk. "It's good work," Emma replied. "Challenging, but honest. What about you? How are things in major crimes?" Lisa's promotion had come as a result of her work on the Meridian case, and she now headed a special unit focused on investigating corruption within medical and law enforcement institutions. Busy were reviewing over 300 suspicious deaths from the past 5 years, looking for other cases that might have been misclassified. Any patterns emerging? Nothing as systematic as Webb's program, but we've found evidence of isolated corrupt coroners taking bribes, police officers covering up specific cases, hospital administrators destroying inconvenient records. Your investigation opened doors that had been sealed for years. Emma felt gratified that her work continued to have an impact beyond the immediate Meridian conspiracy. The case had sparked nationwide reforms in medical examiner oversight, and had led to congressional hearings on classified research protocols. "Lisa, I got a letter yesterday that I wanted to share with you," Emma said, pulling an envelope from her desk drawer. "It's from Carmen Rodriguez, Michael's mother." Lisa leaned forward as Emma read from the handwritten letter. "Dr. Patterson, I wanted you to know that our family has found peace. We know that Michael died fighting for justice, and that his death helped save other lives. We're establishing a scholarship fund in his name for students pursuing careers in medical ethics. We hope his legacy will be protecting others from the kind of evil that took him from us." "That's beautiful," Lisa said softly. "How are the other families doing?" "Most of them are healing. Some have filed civil lawsuits against Meridian and the hospitals. Others have focused on advocacy and education. Jennifer Walsh's parents are working with Dr. Kim to develop new informed consent protocols for medical research." Emma's phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Sarah Kim, who had become a close friend during the months of investigation and trial preparation. "New job at CDC, going well. Developed 3 new protocols for research oversight this month. The victims are still saving lives." The impact of their investigation continued to ripple outward in ways Emma hadn't anticipated. Medical schools now use the Meridian case as a teaching example of research ethics, and several states had passed legislation requiring independent oversight of all classified medical research. "Emma," Lisa said, "I've been thinking about something," Carmen Rodriguez said at the memorial service. "She thanked us for giving her son Bach not his life, but his memory and dignity. I think that's the real victory here." Emma nodded, remembering how many families had expressed similar sentiments. The truth hadn't brought back their loved ones, but it had restored their memory and provided meaning to their deaths. "I keep that in mind every day," Emma said. "Every case that comes through here represents someone's family member, someone who deserves truth and justice. I'll never again assume that an apparent suicide is actually suicide, or that an accident is really accidental." As Lisa prepared to leave, she paused at Emma's door. "You know, when this all started, I thought we were just investigating 3 suspicious deaths. I never imagined we'd uncover something that would change how medical research is conducted in this country." Sometimes the most important investigations start with the smallest inconsistencies, Emma replied. 3 unusual bruise patterns led to justice for 127 families and reforms that will protect countless future victims. After Lisa left, Emma returned to her current case, load 5 new cases that had arrived over the weekend. Each one would receive the same thorough, meticulous examination that had become her trademark. She would look for the details that others might miss, question inconsistencies that others might ignore, and fight for truth that others might find inconvenient. Her computer chimed with an email from a former colleague, Dr. Patterson. "We have a case here that reminds me of the patterns you identified in the Meridian investigation. Would you be willing to consult?" Emma smiled as she typed her response. "Send me everything you have. Let's make sure no family has to wonder whether they failed their loved one." As she began reviewing the new consultation request, Emma reflected on how profoundly her life had changed since that morning when she'd first noticed unusual bruising patterns on 3 apparent suicide victims. The investigation had cost her sleep, safety, and peace of mind, but it had also shown her the true meaning of her profession. She was not just a medical examiner's assistant anymore. She was a guardian of truth, a voice for the voiceless, and a protector of families who deserved answers about what happened to their loved ones. It was the most important work she could imagine, and she approached each new case with the knowledge that somewhere, someone was counting on her to find the truth, no matter where it led or what it cost to uncover. The victims of the Meridian conspiracy would never be forgotten, and their deaths would continue to save lives through the reforms and vigilance their sacrifice had inspired. That was the real legacy of Emma's investigation, not just justice for the dead, but protection for the living.